January 1961. Washington, D.C. is covered in 8 inches of fresh snow. Tomorrow, John Fitzgerald Kennedy will be sworn in as the 35th President of the United States. Tonight, the biggest stars in Hollywood are gathering at the National Guard Armory for the most glamorous inaugural gala in American history. Frank Sinatra has spent months planning this event. Ella Fitzgerald, Nat King Cole, Gene Kelly, Laurence Olivier, the cream of American entertainment. But there's one man who should be there, and isn't. Deana Martin, the king of cool. 1/3 of the legendary Rat Pack, a man who had campaigned for Kennedy across 20 states. He received the invitation. He was expected to perform, and he said no. Not because he was sick, not because he had another engagement. Deana Martin refused to attend the presidential inauguration because of a phone call he received 3 weeks earlier. A phone call that revealed something about John F. Kennedy that most Americans would never know. And what Deana Martin did next would define who he really was, far more than any song he ever sang or any movie he ever made. This is the story they don't tell you about Deana Martin. This is the story of the night he chose loyalty over power. And this story begins not in Washington, not in Hollywood, but in a steel town in Ohio where a little Italian boy couldn't even speak English. Steubenville, Ohio, 1917. They called it Little Chicago, a rough town on the Ohio River, famous for gambling dens, bootleggers, and steel mills that painted the sky orange at night. This is where Dino Paul Crocetti was born on June 7, 1917. His father, Gaetano, had arrived from a small village in Italy's Abruzzo region with nothing but a barber's scissors and a dream. His mother, Angela, kept the house filled with the smell of pasta fagioli and the sound of Italian love songs. For the first 5 years of his life, little Dino didn't speak a word of English. Not one word. In his home, only Italian was spoken. The old country. The old ways. When he finally entered Grant Elementary School, the other children were merciless. Dago. Wop. Greasy Italian. Dino stuttered when he tried to speak English. His accent was thick. His clothes were shabby. He was different. And in 1920s America, being different, being an immigrant, meant being less than. Remember this. Remember how it felt to be excluded because of where you came from, because of who you were. Deana Martin never forgot. By 10th grade, he'd had enough of school. He dropped out and went looking for work. He hauled ice. He pumped gas. He worked in the steel mills, feeling the heat of the furnaces on his face. And at night, he fought. They called him Kid Crochet in the boxing ring. He wasn't particularly good. Years later, he joked that he won all but 11 of his 12 fights. But he was tough. He could take a punch. The boxing left him with a broken nose, a scarred lip, and hands so damaged from fighting without proper tape that his knuckles would ache for the rest of his life. But something else was happening in those Steubenville nights. In the illegal gambling dens and smoky speakeasies, Dino Crocetti discovered he had a voice. Not just any voice. A voice like warm honey. A voice that made women lean closer and men stop talking. He started singing in local clubs, small gigs, a few dollars here and there. But people noticed. There was just one problem. Dino Crocetti. Too Italian, too ethnic, too foreign for mainstream American audiences in the 1930s. A bandleader named Sammy Watkins pulled him aside one night. "Kid, you've got talent, but that name? It's holding you back. You need something." American. Dino Crocetti became Deana Martin. And with that new name came a new life. But he never forgot who he really was. Fast forward to 1959. Deana Martin is no longer a struggling singer from Ohio. He's conquered television, radio, and Hollywood. His partnership with Jerry Lewis made them the biggest comedy duo in America. When that ended, everyone said his career was over. They were wrong. Now Dean Martin stands alongside Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. as part of the most legendary group of entertainers the world has ever seen. The Rat Pack. Las Vegas is their kingdom. The Sands Hotel is their castle. Every night, they own the stage, singing, joking, drinking what looked like bourbon but was actually apple juice. Yes, that famous drinking? Mostly an act. Dean Martin could hold his liquor, but he couldn't have performed at that level if he was actually as drunk as he pretended to be. His son would confirm this years later. The marquee at the Sands would read, Dean Martin, maybe Frank, maybe Sammy. When all three showed up, Las Vegas went insane. But here's what most people didn't see. Behind the jokes and the glamour, these three men had formed something rare in Hollywood, a genuine friendship. And no bond was stronger than the one between Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr., the most talented man in the Rat Pack, could sing, dance, do impressions, play multiple instruments. He was a one-man entertainment machine. He was also black. In 1950s America, that meant everything. In March 1950, Sammy went to see Frank Sinatra perform at the Copacabana in New York. He brought his friend Buddy Rich. They were turned away at the door because of Sammy's skin color. When Sinatra heard about it, he was furious. He insisted Sammy come back the next night, alone, and made sure he was let in. That was the beginning. When Las Vegas hotels tried to ban Sammy from staying in the same rooms as white performers, Sinatra and Dean Martin refused to perform. If Sammy can't stay here, we don't play here. The hotels backed down. One by one, the segregation walls of Las Vegas crumbled, not because of laws or protests, but because three entertainers refused to accept injustice. Dean Martin's daughter, Deana, would later recall, Sammy was family. He came to our house. He was my Uncle Sammy. My father didn't see color. He saw a brother. This is who Dean Martin was, not the drunk playboy of legend, but a man who would stand by his friends no matter what it cost him. 1960. Sammy Davis Jr. falls in love. Her name is May Britt. She's a Swedish actress with blonde hair and blue eyes. She's beautiful, she's talented, she's white. In 1960, interracial marriage was illegal in 31 American states. The Supreme Court wouldn't strike down these laws for another 7 years. When Sammy and May announced their engagement in June 1960, America lost its mind. Death threats poured in, not dozens, hundreds, every single day. Neo-Nazi groups protested outside Sammy's concerts. Signs read, "Go back to the Congo, you kosher coon." Yes, they knew he had converted to Judaism. They hated him for that too. Sammy had to hire armed guards around the clock. At the Democratic National Convention in July 1960, where the Rat Pack sang the national anthem to support John F. Kennedy, Sammy was loudly booed by Southern delegates. Booed for singing the national anthem. The wedding was originally planned for October. But then came the pressure, not from racists, from Democrats. The Kennedy campaign was terrified. The election was going to be close. They couldn't afford to lose Southern votes because of association with an interracial couple. Sammy was asked to postpone his wedding until after the election. He agreed, for the good of the party, for Jack Kennedy, who he believed in. November 8th, 1960. Kennedy wins the presidency by the narrowest margin in American history. 5 days later, on November 13th, Sammy Davis Jr. married May Britt in his Hollywood Hills home. The original plan to hold the wedding at a synagogue was abandoned after the temple received bomb threats. Frank Sinatra stood as best man. The wedding certificate bears his signature as a witness. It was a beautiful ceremony, full of love, full of hope. Sammy had sacrificed for the Kennedys. He had postponed the happiest day of his life for them. Now it was time for the new president to return the favor. December 1960. Frank Sinatra is planning the biggest event of his life, the pre-inaugural gala for President-elect Kennedy. He's calling in every favor, pulling every string. Ethel Merman, Laurence Olivier. He buys out entire Broadway shows so the stars can fly to Washington. The Rat Pack will be there. Deana Martin, Joey Bishop, Peter Lawford, who is married to Kennedy's sister. And of course, Sammy Davis Jr., the man who had campaigned tirelessly, who had been booed at the convention, who had postponed his own wedding. Then the call comes. Not to Sammy directly, to Frank Sinatra. The message is from the Kennedy camp. Sammy Davis Jr. is not welcome at the inauguration. Let that sink in. A man who had sacrificed for Kennedy, who had risked his safety campaigning for him, who had literally been the target of death threats for supporting the Democratic ticket. Disinvited. Why? Because he was now married to a white woman, and the new president of the United States was afraid that an interracial couple at his inauguration would upset Southern politicians. John F. Kennedy, the champion of civil rights, the man who would give speeches about equality and justice. He threw Sammy Davis Jr. away like yesterday's newspaper. Sinatra was furious. He argued. He pleaded. He threatened. It didn't matter. The decision was final. Now here's the part of the story most people don't know. When Deana Martin heard what happened, he didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply said no. Deana Martin's daughter, Deana, remembers the moment clearly. Her father came home. His face was different. Something had changed. When he heard that Sammy had been disinvited from the inauguration, Deana Martin was astounded. That was the word Deana used. Astounded. This was the President of the United States. This was an invitation that most entertainers would kill for. This was a chance to be part of history. Deana Martin looked at the invitation, and he made a decision. It's not right. I'm not going. That was it. No drama. No public announcement. No angry speeches. Just a quiet refusal. Years later, Deana would explain, "He was my Uncle Sammy. He came to our house. He was family. So it was pretty remarkable. My dad was going to take a stand because it was the right thing to do. It didn't matter what JFK or anyone else was going to think of him." She continued, "This is Sammy Davis Jr., and that was his friend. And for family to not be invited for those reasons made my father very upset. He just said, 'It's not right. I'm not going.' And that was it. He wouldn't think about it anymore." Think about what Deana Martin gave up that night. Access to the White House, presidential favor, the chance to perform for the leader of the free world. He gave it all up. For friendship, for principle, for a black man in 1961 America. Remember that Italian boy from Steubenville? The one who couldn't speak English? The one who was bullied for being different? He grew up to become one of the biggest stars in the world, and he never forgot what it felt like to be excluded. January 19th, 1961. The inaugural gala goes on without Deana Martin. Frank Sinatra escorts Jackie Kennedy to her box. The stars perform. Kennedy gives a speech thanking Sinatra for his efforts. It raises nearly $2 million to pay off the Democratic campaign debt. But there's an empty seat where Deana Martin should have been. And somewhere, not far away, Sammy Davis Jr. knows that at least one friend stood by him when it mattered most. The wound of this betrayal would stay with Sammy for years. Those close to him said he never fully forgave Kennedy for what happened. In 1963, Sammy and May were invited to a White House reception for African American leaders. When Kennedy saw them there, he reportedly hissed at his aides, "Get them out of here." The couple was escorted away from photographers. This was the reality behind Camelot, the beautiful lie of the Kennedy era. But here's what's remarkable. Dean Martin never talked about what he did. He never gave interviews about his decision. He never tried to use it for publicity or praise. For Dean Martin, it wasn't a grand gesture. It was simply what you do when someone attacks your family. The Rat Pack continued. Dean and Sammy remained brothers until the very end. In 1988, they reunited for one more tour. Frank, Dean, and Sammy together again. Dean was struggling. His son, Dean Paul, had died in a plane crash the year before. He was drinking heavily. The sparkle was gone from his eyes, but he showed up for his friends, because that's who he was. The last time all three were on stage together was November 13th, 1989. A tribute to Sammy, who was dying of throat cancer. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., three men who changed entertainment forever, three friends who stood by each other when it mattered. Sammy died in May 1990. Dean followed on Christmas Day 1995. After Dean's death, Frank Sinatra said something that captured everything. We were not brothers by blood, but by choice. So who was Dean Martin really? Not the drunk from the legends. That was an act. Not the careless playboy. He was home for dinner with his 8 children every night. Dean Martin was the son of Italian immigrants who never forgot where he came from. A man who knew what it felt like to be excluded, and spent his life making sure others didn't feel the same. He refused to perform at segregated venues. He stood up to Las Vegas casinos. He turned down the President of the United States, and he did it all without fanfare, without seeking credit, without making it about himself. Tom Donahue, the director of the documentary Dean Martin, King of Cool, said it best. It was Dean Martin who stood up for his friend and said, "I'm not going to be part of the inauguration if Sammy isn't going." That really impressed me. He had a sense of honor. The more I got to know Dean Martin, the man, the more I grew to truly love and admire him. In a world obsessed with power and fame, in an industry where people will do anything to get ahead, Dean Martin chose friendship. He chose principle. He chose to be a man of honor, even when no one was watching. That's the real story of Dean Martin. That's why they called him the King of Cool.